Good afternoon, Detective.
Good afternoon.
Detective, we've heard mention of someone with the nickname Audie. That is Adriana Blake, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And she also used to be known as Adriana Prieto. That was her maiden name, is that correct?
Correct.
So Adriana Blake, Adriana Prieto, Audie, A-U-D-I. That's all the same person?
Yes, ma'am.
You are aware of 2 cell phones that Brian Goodwin had?
Yes.
Only 2?
That's what I am aware of, yes.
And I believe you mentioned on direct examination that early on, Adriana and Devon Braet became suspects. Is that correct?
Persons of interest, yeah.
I'm sorry, persons of interest. And what do you mean when you say early on?
That was learned primarily on the 15th through interviews of people who had conversations and communications with them.
Will you need this poster board up here, counsel?
I will not, Your Honor.
Officer, could I have you remove that? I don't think that this witness can see you.
Sure.
Well, all right. Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. And folks, it's possible I might not have noticed, in which case flag me down. Make sure, because you need to see the witnesses and the exhibits as they're coming in, so thank you. Pardon for the interruption, counsel, when you are ready.
Thank you. Thank you for the correction, Detective. They were parties of interest early on, correct?
Yes.
And what is early on?
That would have been January 16th.
Okay, so you misspoke a moment ago when you said 15th.
Yes, I apologize.
Okay. At what point did they become persons of interest?
Pretty early on. And that was stemming from their behaviors that were described to us by multiple people trying to get in touch with them throughout the day to check the welfare of Mr. Goodwin, not allowing them access to do so, or just flat out refusing, in addition to them leaving town shortly after this particular incident. So that was obviously suspicious for us.
And did anybody, the people you're talking about, Nick Blazek?
That was one of them. I think primarily was through Amber LaBarge and Richard Dean.
Okay. You interviewed Ryan Ellis?
Joseph, yeah, Ryan's his middle name, yes.
Okay. Not helpful that his name is Joseph Ellis. He goes by Ryan Ellis, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And I think he spells it R-Y-N-N-E?
I believe so.
Okay. He was not one of the very helpful, very willing witnesses or people that you interviewed, was he?
I did interview him. He came around eventually. He wasn't forthcoming with everything, which isn't unusual, but he did provide useful information.
After a lot of lying, right?
That's accurate.
Okay. I mean, you at least said to him that you were surprised by how much he was lying to you, correct?
I don't specifically recall that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
And it was certainly notable to you that when you told him the investigation was revolved around, strike that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that you were letting him know you were interrogating him about the nitro, correct?
I believe that is accurate, yes. He was the one that was operating that and was taken into custody and brought to the station after operating that car.
Okay. And when you let him know that the person who owned the nitro was deceased, he reacted and responded in a very surprisingly heightened manner, didn't he?
Yeah.
Okay. And in your 23 years, I believe you told him that you had never seen somebody respond in that way when learning that somebody was dead. You hadn't even told him that it was somebody who was killed, correct?
I believe that is accurate, yes.
Early on in the first interview, he told you, look, I'm going to be honest now, right?
I believe so. Would that be after confronting him with the information of the death investigation?
Yes.
Something to that extent. The specifics of it, it's hard for me to recall.
It's been a while.
It has.
Okay. But fair to say that he kept promising to be honest with you, and then the story kept evolving, and he kept promising to be honest again, and then it evolved more and again, correct?
That's certain.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Redirect?
Certainly. Detective Robinson, is the jury going to hear from Joseph Ellis?
He will be testifying.
All right.
Yes.
And did Joseph Ellis even know Brian Goodwin or Amy Smith?
No,
And did he have any association with 5210 North Division Street?
he did not.
Okay. At the time that law enforcement had an encounter with him, what date did that occur?
January 16th.
Okay. Was it under circumstances that would have been very surprising and alarming that contact occurred?
Yeah, they did the vehicle was reported stolen at that time, and they did a full vehicle block.
Okay.
Banged
All
it
right.
up pretty well and took him into custody.
All right. And so was he devoid of any information about that Dodge Nitro belonging to a Brian Goodwin?
I do not believe he had knowledge of that, no.
Sure. But was this a vehicle that had been left at a residence that he had been spending the night at?
Yes, which was 1604 Arlington.
And who left that vehicle there?
Devon and Adriana.
I have no further questions.
Recross.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
You may step down, Detective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, at this time, the state calls Lieutenant Kelly Johnson.
Would you please raise your right hand to be sworn? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give in this matter will be the complete truth? If so, say, I do. I do. Thank you. Have a seat. That chair spins out. It's a little bit easier to get in and out of if you do that. Mr. Kirkendall, when you are ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state and spell your first and last name?
Kelly E. Johnson, Kelly E. Johnson.
What do you do for a living?
I am a lieutenant for the Davenport Fire Department.
What does it mean to be a lieutenant for the Davenport Fire Department?
It's the first step of a company officer. In essence, I sit on the right side, I talk on the radio, I look at the computer when we go on a run. I'm in charge of a 3 or 4 man company on a daily basis,
How long have you been with the fire department?
26 plus years.
Can you give the jury a perspective, let's just say an average shift for a company? So you're saying it's 3 or 4 guys that you're supervising. What are you doing on a normal shift?
Okay, so we work 24-hour shifts. We arrive at 06:45 in the morning. We live there, we eat there, we sleep there. Well, sometimes we sleep there, not always. We have daily training, we have inspections, we do public relations events. We're there to serve the public for that 24-hour period.
What kind of calls do you respond to during that period?
In today's world, a lot of our is emergency medical services, EMS calls. We do have fires. We have hazmat incidents. We car accidents. Just about everything. If they don't know who to call, generally they call the fire department.
When you do get called to a fire, what does that response look like?
Structure fire.
Let's go with that.
So if we're responding to a structure fire in the city of Davenport, generally they're going to respond with 3 engine companies, 2 truck companies, and a command car.
What's the difference between an engine and a truck?
Engines, generally, they have a lot of hose. We carry 500 gallons of onboard water. We, as a general rule, are responsible for extinguishing fire. Truck companies do forcible entry, search and rescue, ventilation, and control utilities. If you look at the trucks, they're different in the fact that the ladder truck will have generally a big aerial ladder on them. Generally, they'll reach anywhere between 75 to 100 feet. They do have some water on board, and they can extinguish fires, but that job is better served by the engine companies.
So, responding to a structure fire, you said three.
3 engines, 2 trucks, and a command car. Okay. The command car is generally the district chief, and he will have command of that scene once he arrives.
Were you working as a firefighter in the early morning hours of January 16th, 2024?
Yes, sir.
And to what company were you assigned at that point?
On that given day, I was detailed out to Engine 7, which is on Northwest Boulevard, 2302 West 67th Street in Davenport State. But I was assigned out of Central Station in downtown.
So normally you'd be working out of Central Station?
Yes, sir.
That day you were up on the northwest side of town?
Yes, sir.
Before 3:55 a.m., had you responded to any other fire calls that night?
Yes, sir. It was about midnight. We were at a structure fire just north of Menards for about 3 hours.
What were the environmental conditions out there?
It was about -10. Not a lot of fun to fight fire in those conditions.
And that windy too?
Probably, I don't recall.
Snow on the ground?
I believe there was some.
At some point, there was a fire call around 3:55 a.m. to a structure on Division Street. Do you remember that?
I do, sir.
Describe how you were involved in the response.
Okay, as I stated earlier, that was a structure fire response. Engine 7 responded. That's our first due area. First due means it's in our immediate response territory. So Engine 7 was the first company on scene. You want me to go further?
Well, we can talk it through. When you first got on scene, what did you observe?
Okay. So as the first in company officer, we have to do a size up. A size up is painting a picture for the income company so that they know what potentially they're experiencing or they're going to see when they arrive on scene.
How do you normally conduct a size up?
Size up, I'm going to tell them what kind of structure it is, what kind of smoke or fire conditions we have. In this case, if there was any immediate rescue concerns.
Do you remember what kind of structure you were dealing with at 5210 North Division Street?
It was a ranch. I believe it was, we didn't know it at the time, but it was split into a duplex.
When you got there, could you tell that there was a structure fire?
Yes, there was smoke visible, didn't know where.
How did you determine where the fire was?
Part of that size up, the company officer is to do a 360, which basically you want to get a view of all 4 sides of the structure. In fire service terminology, the street side, in this case it would be the east side, is the A side, and we go clockwise around the building. So the south side would have been B, the west side would have been C, and the north side would have been D.
Did you complete the 360?
I did.
And where did you observe the most fire or most smoke was coming from?
Okay, when I went to the C side of the structure, I found fire coming out of a basement window on the C side or the west side of the structure.
And that essentially is in the backyard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You said it was coming out of a window. Could you tell at that point if the window was open or broken?
The window was broken. It was we call that venting. The fire was venting out of that window.
At that point, did you have any way of telling whether it was broken because of the fire or before the fire?
Not at that time.
What did you do after you completed your size up?
So, there again, in the fire service, we have modes of attack. In this case, we're going to be on offensive mode. And offensive mode is we're going to attack the fire to try and extinguish it. On that given day, I had myself a driver and a firefighter. I instructed my firefighter to go to the C side of the structure with an 1 3/4 attack line. Our rigs are 150 feet long, so I was able to reach back there. We deployed a tactic, it's called, we hit it hard from the yard, which essentially we're gonna put it in that window and try to take some of the punch out of that fire, and then eventually we'll go back inside and finish extinguishing the fire.
So it was you and your firefighter who were working on that?
Yes, sir.
After you hit it from the yard, well, how long does that process take?
That's maybe 10 seconds. And keep in mind that that hose puts out about 125 gallons of water a minute, so you're putting a lot of water in there in a short period of time.
So after hitting it for a few seconds in the backyard, what do you do next?
We proceeded to the B side, which was the south side. There was a man door just right near the garage. It was locked. We were able to force it. We proceeded down the stairs into the fire room, I'm going to call it. We went inside and finished extinguishing the fire.
When you say you forced the door, what's the process? What does that look like?
Well, we do have tools for that, but in this case, we put a shoulder into it.
Okay. When you first entered into the building, well, let me ask first, what are you wearing when you're going into a fire scene like that?
So, the standard firefighter protective gear. I'll start from the bottom. We wear boots. They're reinforced boots, waterproof, heat-proof. We wear a pair of pants, or bunker pants we call them, with suspenders, a coat, helmet, SCBA, a self-contained breathing apparatus, so we can breathe in toxic environments, and a helmet, and we have a pneumatic hood. The gear has a thermal barrier to protect us from the heat. It has a vapor barrier to protect us from the water. This ensemble weighs roughly 60 pounds when you have everything on.
And when you're wearing that breathing apparatus, that's supposed to protect you from all of the possible hazardous materials?
Smoke and heat, yep, primarily.
And you're not smelling things as you're going down?
No, it's encapsulated, so if we're smelling things, that's not good. Doesn't mean smoke's getting through our mask somehow.
Okay. Describe what you observed as you breached the door and went down the stairs.
So you got to keep, in a typical structure fire, in this one, you have heavy smoke conditions. Really, you can't see anything. You're going by feel. There was minimal amount of heat. I'm guessing maybe 200 to 300 degrees on this floor level. In a typical room, temperatures can reach about 1,000 to 1,200 degrees at the ceiling. But us putting that hose in the window took a lot of that heat out of that.
So you're going down by feel?
Well, we were able to see going down the stairs, but once we got to the bottom of the basement stairs, then visibility quickly dissipated.
Were you able to associate where you were at the bottom of the stairs versus where you had been observed?
Well, one of us remains orientated. My firefighter was in front of me with the hose line.
And so what do you do when you get to the bottom of the stairs?
Me or my crew?
Both of you.
So firefighter Nick, he extinguished the fire. We were probably 5 to 7 feet inside the door. And, I told command by radio, I said we had the fire knocked down. And a short time after that, Nick communicated to me that he had found a body.
And when you say you're 5 to 7 feet inside, is that inside that bedroom where the fire
Inside
was?
that door. The door going into the bedroom, yes,
Okay.
at the bottom of the stairs.
Okay. And was that to the left or the right at the bottom of the stairs?
To the left.
And that would have been, again, going towards the west.
Yes, sir.
So you knocked on the fire in the bedroom, and then Nick told you that there was a body?
Yeah, and I radioed that to command, hey, we have a victim.
Did you know immediately that it was a deceased person?
At that point in time, we still had zero visibility, so we're attempting to bring them, I guess I didn't know if it was a male or female, out. And they communicated to me that it seemed like it was tied to something.
How long did those efforts go on?
Maybe a minute. Another company came down to try and assist us.
And at some point you did realize it was a deceased person.
Yes.
What are the procedures after that?
So typically in that situation, if we don't have a viable victim. We leave things as they are for investigative purposes.
At any point when you were in that bedroom, did you notice a second body?
I did not.
Did anyone else in your company or in the
No.
other helping company?
Another company, I believe, discovered the second body a little later in the incident.
And that would have been after you and Nick had already exited?
Yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, were both of those bodies found in the same bedroom?
I believe so.
When it comes to the fire qualities, we'll go over some of that with the fire investigator who worked on the case, but can you give us an idea of how big the fire actually was?
It was more than likely room and contents. After it's burned out, it's hard to tell what actually was on fire, but I would say it wasn't crazy. I don't know, the best word for it is, it wasn't a substantial fire, I guess I'll say that.
Okay, it didn't engulf the whole
No,
residence?
in my experience, I've seen substantially more intense fires, and this didn't appear to be the case.
Did it appear that you had responded relatively early in the life of the fire? As in, do you have any way of knowing if it had been burning for a long time?
Generally, if it's burning long enough, and vents a window, it's been burning for a little bit, but we have no way of knowing whether or not that window was broken by somebody else prior.
Why does it matter if a window is vented as far as?
Because fire needs oxygen to substantiate, and if it can't get oxygen, it'll smolder, it'll go out. So if the window has, or if the fire has ample oxygen from that window being compromised, then it's just going to feed that and take care of all the fuel that's in that room.
When you and Nick had first gone down the stairs, do you know if the bedroom door was open or closed?
I believe it was closed, but the top of it was about halfway up, was burned out.
What were your duties at the scene after you exited that bedroom?
So after we found the victim, Chief McDougal, our commander that night, he ordered us out to, we call it rehab or recycle. And then we just kind of hung out until things kind of wound down.
And you mentioned it earlier, I think, but turning the scene over to the police becomes a priority in that situation.
They were, I guess I'm not real sure when that call was made or who made that call, but yes, in this case, it became a crime scene.
Okay. All right, thank you, Lieutenant Johnson. I have nothing further at this time.
Cross-examination?
Thank you. Good
Ms.
afternoon.
Ackerman?
Good afternoon, Lieutenant.
Good afternoon.
Let's just briefly talk about fire, because in your career, you've encountered a few, haven't you?
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, in about the span of 4 hours on January 16th last year, you encountered 2.
We did.
Is there such a thing as a normal fire?
No two fires are the same. You have different layouts, you have different construction types, you have different fire loads.
Fire, by its very nature, is predictably unpredictable, right?
I'd say that's pretty, yeah, I'd agree with that.
There are a lot of factors that come into play in that, correct?
Yep.
One that we've already talked about briefly is just access to an oxygen source.
Correct.
Some of the other ones might be, you talked briefly about what the weather was like, correct?
Yep.
If there were any other fuels that were present, correct?
Fuels and as in normal things that are in a house, or fuels as in accelerants?
Right, because normal things that are in a house, even those burn differently, don't they?
True.
Say a mattress might burn in one way, yes?
In today's world, mostly everything is petroleum based, so things burn hotter than faster than they did back in the 50s and 60s, when it was mostly natural fibers and wood furniture and things of that nature.
Would it be true then that a room that had a lot of clothing, bedding, personal effects, those would maybe catch fire more quickly and more strongly?
That depends on the conditions, but it's a conceivable notion, yes.
The only other thing I want to ask you about is this hose that you told us about. The hose puts out 125 gallons of water a minute?
It can.
It can.
Actually, it's 150. If we had it at full operating pressure, but it would be very hard to maneuver.
Imagine.
So we dial it down a little bit normally.
And in this case, the hose was used on this fire, correct?
Yep. It was
Go ahead.
an 1 3/4 hose. We call it a pre-connected line. It's laid out in the truck so that it's easily deployed or quickly deployed.
And in this case, it sounds like it was deployed through a window?
Initially, it wasn't deployed through the window. Water was sprayed through the window. And then the hose was maneuvered back to the B side of the structure to advance down the stairways.
Do you recall how long that hose was spraying water on the crime scene?
Through the window, or
Either.
as I stated earlier, probably 10 seconds at most through the window, and probably another 15 seconds maybe when we were inside the fire room.
Thanks, Lieutenant. That's all I have.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Lieutenant. Thank you.
Your Honor, the state calls Cheryl Hageman to the stand.
Would you come forward, please, and raise your right hand to be sworn? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give in this matter will be the complete truth? If so, say I do. Thank you. You have a seat in the black chair.
Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and your last name.
Cheryl Hagman, CHERYL,
Ms. Hageman, I want to take you back to January of 2024. What community did you reside in?
Scott County.
Have you since moved from Scott County?
Yes, I have.
Do you live some distance from the Scott County area?
I currently live in Ames, Iowa.
And so because you've had to travel, are we taking you out of order for purposes of your testimony relative to the lineup of witnesses who are going to be testifying?
Yes.
All right, so just to give the jury a perspective so that they'll understand that sequentially what you're going to talk about is a little out of order. When you were residing here in Davenport back in 2024, what was the nature of your occupation?
I was a bus driver for Riverbend Transit Company, which they drive for elderly and handicapped.
Okay, and then describe what those buses look like.
You see them, they got RBT all over them. They're white. They're like 14 passenger vans.
Describe how that service works as it relates to the elderly and individuals who are handicapped that utilize the bus service.
They mostly will call and schedule appointments for doctor's appointments. We did take clients to grocery stores, things like that. It was for those that couldn't get out and drive themselves.
Okay. And what days of the week would you typically work?
I worked 5 to 6 days a week,
Sure.
Monday through Saturday.
When you would come in on any given shift then, did you already have a set schedule of what you were to do for that day?
Yes.
Okay, explain how that would work.
We had a tablet in our buses, and then we would have a time that we had to punch in, and then it would bring up, as the times came up that we had to pick a client up, it would give us that time on the screen with the address, and so we knew where we had to be at what time.
All right. Were you on duty on January 15th of 2024?
Yes.
What time did your shift start on January 15th of 2024?
Usually I'd start somewhere between 6 o'clock and 6:30, just depending on the day.
Okay, I'd like to direct your attention, if I could, to the time frame shortly after 7 a.m. on January 15th of 2024. Do you recall where you were physically located?
I had a habit of stopping at that Casey's store on 53rd and Division. I would stop there and get breakfast before I'd start my shift sometimes.
Okay, and around that time frame, were you already there in the parking lot of Casey's?
I was actually backed in to the parking lot. Normally I pull up on the end of the building. That day it was busy and I pulled up in front and then I backed up and I was facing would have been west towards Division Street.
All right. Now, if I could, Ms. Hageman, I want to show you an exhibit that we've introduced. Take a look at it, and then if you could, show the jury where you were parked at. I've got to do two things. First of all, I'll put out that easel, and second of all, I'll get the exhibit. And then if you could, let me help you. I'm going to turn this around. We'll have you get out of the witness stand. Let me see. Your Honor, may we go ahead and republish State's Exhibit 74A, or 73A?
You may.
All right. All right, so Ms. Hageman, looking here at State's Exhibit 73A, and let me look for a pointer.
It's right here.
Right here, okay. I'll give you this pointer, and then we'll have you step off to the left side of that diagram, or that exhibit. Do you recognize what's depicted in State's Exhibit 73A?
I do.
Explain.
It's the Casey's store, 53rd is here, Division Street runs this way.
Okay.
That morning I pulled in, got my stuff, and then I came out and I backed my bus in along the curb over here, so I was sitting out of the way of traffic.
Okay. Now, as you describe that, we're looking at the lot. Is there a point of entry that you can utilize to
yeah,
pull
it's
it
like right
off?
over here, and there's another entry that's back here on the side off of 53rd.
Okay, so then is there one that you can pull into off of Division?
Yes.
Okay.
It's kind of out of the side of these trees.
All right, if the foliage was off of those trees, to the right side of that image, where would your bus have been parked?
Right about in here.
All right, stay right there. Your Honor, may we go ahead and publish 73B?
You may.
Now, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 73B. As you were parked facing, looking out onto Division Street, do you recognize anything in this image that you would have been able to observe as you were parked at the Casey's?
I could see all of that because I was facing pretty much directly across from this house. I could see here, and I also was able to see the State Farm business
Okay.
there on the corner.
For State's Exhibit 73B, do we have three physical structures in that image?
Yes.
And you were able to see all three structures?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and take your seat. When you parked in that area, where were you physically located?
In the parking lot of the Casey's store.
But in the bus itself?
Oh, I was sitting in the driver's seat,
All right. What were you doing as you were sitting there in the driver's seat?
eating my pizza.
While you were sitting there eating your pizza, was your attention drawn to activity as you looked across the street?
It was.
Describe for the jury what activity you observed.
I did witness a gentleman coming across the street, and there was snow on the ground, so what caught my attention was that he was walking across the street, and rather than going through like the driveway, he chose to go over the snowbank, and my first thought was, you're gonna slip and fall on your butt.
Sure.
Because he had tennis shoes on.
Oh.
And he walked over the snow and didn't slip, and kind of did like a maneuver, like he was impressed with himself, like he was snowboarding down the snowbank. I was surprised that he didn't fall, so,
Okay, did this appear to be a younger teenage boy?
no.
No? All right. Was it a male subject?
Yes.
All right. Now, after observing that, what did you observe next?
Well, I know he went into the store, and then I did watch him walk back across the street.
Okay. After that subject returned across the street, was there further activity that developed as you were sitting there in the driver's seat looking to the west?
I did notice a car that had pulled up, and what made me notice it was the fact that it pulled up on Division Street, which is a busy street, and they put their flashers on, and they were sitting right in traffic, and I was concerned that, you know, it's a bad spot to be sitting. So, and then I did notice a female come out with a coat, and she got into the back seat of the car, and at the time I thought it was kind of odd just because I noticed there was only, you know, the driver in the car, and I just was curious, like, why'd she get in the back seat?
Sure.
So,
The vehicle that pulled up and put its flashers on, what direction was it facing on Division?
south.
South. All right. So then the female that you described coming out of the house, which house did she come out of?
The one that I was looking directly at.
Okay. Would that have been
The one in the middle.
the one in the middle? All right. All right. So that's been identified as 5210 North Division Street. Okay. After you saw the female get into the car, were you distracted and looked somewhere else for a moment?
Yeah, that was all I had seen after that, so,
Okay. Then did you look back toward Division Street?
yes.
Was the vehicle still sitting there in the travel portion of Division, facing south?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see the vehicle leave?
Yes, I did.
And then what direction did the vehicle travel?
South.
All right. Does that describe all of your observations for January 15th of 2024?
Yes.
All right. Now, but for the young man who came across and so adeptly went across that mound of snow, would that have really stuck out in your mind?
No.
All right.
Yep.
I want to direct your attention then to the early morning hours of January 16th of 2024. Were you working that day?
Yes, I was.
All right. Did you have occasion to be back in the area of Casey's there in Division and 53rd?
Yes, it's not actually that far from where our buses are parked and located.
Okay, go ahead and set the stage for us.
I just remember that day that I heard on our radio that somebody had mentioned that there was a large police presence at that intersection, and I happened to be coming back shortly thereafter to go back to our bus lot to end my, my work shift.
Okay.
And that's when I seen fire trucks and police cars and caution tape, and so I knew something was going on.
Sure. And what time of the day would you have been passing by that area that you saw the large police presence and the fire personnel?
I want to say it was somewhere before noon,
Sure.
like later morning, early afternoon.
What developed after you made those observations?
I went back to our bus lot, and then I thought that I should go to Casey's, see what was going on, and I did. I went in and asked the clerk. I said, "What's going on across the street?" And he mentioned that there was, investigation and stuff. So, and I had said that I was sitting there that previous morning, watching that house, and he asked me, "Do you want to talk to somebody?" And I said, "Well, I probably should." And he said that there happened to be a detective there at the Casey's store, so they proceeded to tell the detective that I was there, and then I went in and gave my statement to the detective.
Okay. The detective that was present in the Casey store, what was he doing when you had that conversation with the clerk?
He was watching video surveillance.
All right. And then through the process of that detective watching video surveillance footage, is that when you were directed or he was directed to you?
Yeah, he was in the Casey's manager's office.
All right.
And they had me go back into the office.
What happened when you had contact with the officer back in the manager's office?
I pretty much just told him exactly what I was just telling you, and he took notes, and that was that. Gave
Okay.
him my name and phone number, and that was the last I'd heard of it until you reached out, so.
Sure. Did you describe for him the observations you made of that vehicle stopping in the middle of the street on Division during the early morning hours of January 15th?
Yes, I did.
What do you recall being the description for that vehicle that had stopped in the middle of Division Street after the 7 o'clock hour on January 15th?
I just remember it was a dark four-door sedan. I
Sure.
couldn't tell you any more than that.
Okay, did that conclude your involvement in this matter?
Yes,
And the events that you've described, did they occur in Scott County, Iowa?
yes.
Thank you, I have no further questions, ma'am.
Cross-examination?
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down, ma'am.
Your Honor, the state calls Sarah Goodwin to the stand.
I'm so exhausted. I've been writing. She's so great.
Your Honor, did the state indicate that the state is calling Sarah Goodwin?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Ma'am, would you please raise your right hand to be sworn? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give in this matter will be the complete truth? If so, say I do.
I do.
Thank you. You can have a seat, please, in the chair.
Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and your last name.
Sarah Goodwin, SarahGoodwin.
Miss Goodwin, how old are you?
45.
45. Are you married or single or widowed?
I'm widowed.
All right. Who were you married to?
Brian Goodwin.
All right. Is Brian Goodwin one of the deceased parties in this particular case?
Yes.
All right. Mrs. Goodwin, if we could, I'd like for you to introduce for us how it is that you became acquainted with Brian Goodwin.
We met through mutual friends back in, I was 21, so a few years ago.
Sure, absolutely.
And we ended up together after the first time we met pretty much the next week. And we're together for 9 years. Then we got married in 2009 and were married until he was deceased, but we were separated after January 1st of 2020 because I'm a nurse and he was on drugs and I couldn't be associated with it, so he had moved out.
Sure. If you were to describe Brian for us, tell us about his background and what type of person he was.
He had a rough childhood. He lived on his own after he was 15. He had a good stepmother who tried her best to help him out, but his biological mom and dad were not the best people. And after he moved out and lived on his own, he got in some trouble, and then he drank a lot. When we first met, he was an alcoholic, and he had graduated or got his GED. When we got together, I told him that I couldn't be with him unless he cleaned up his act, so he did end up getting sober, and then he became a union carpenter. He got laid off when the economy got really bad, and then I got tired of having him at home because I was working 2 jobs and going to school and taking care of the 3 kids. So I told him he needed to go back to school or he needed to find another job. So he went back to school and got straight A's at Scott Community College, getting his diesel mechanic. He worked for a while on semis, and then he got a really good job at working for the county. And then he ended up in secondary roads where he was working up until he lost his job there about
Sure.
6 months before.
All right. Now, when you met Brian at the age of 21, did you already have children yourself?
I had 1 son, yes.
All right. And then through the 9 years that you and Brian dated, and then after the 2 of you got married, did the 2 of you conceive any children of your own?
We had no children together, but he had 2 children from a previous relationship with Amber LaBarge. who was Amber Basie then. And they moved in with us when they were in 1st and 3rd grade, and I raised all 3 of the boys together after that point.
What were the names of Brian and Amber's children?
Seth was the oldest, and Caleb was the youngest.
All right. And was Amber a part of the boys' life as well as your and Brian's life as the boys were growing up?
She was in and out.
Sure. How would you describe your relationship with Amber?
We got along as best we could. She had her own issues, and she moved around a lot. So she had moved out of state for a few years. We didn't see each other for quite a while. She hadn't seen the kids for quite a while. But when she was around, we did communicate and try to keep an open line of communication when it came to the kids.
Sure, absolutely. Did yourself, Brian, and Amber then, when she was back in the Davenport area, worked together as far as her being a part of the children's life and spending time with them, and then of course the children staying with you?
Yes.
All right. And then through the period of 2023 and 2024, how would you describe your and Amber's relationship?
I would say we communicated at least once a week, mostly to touch base about Brian, because we were both worried about him with his drug use, but less about the kids than about Brian.
Certainly. All right. Now, after you got married, over what period of time was Brian really thriving?
I would say up until about 1999.
Then what happened in 1999?
Bryson graduated, he moved away, he joined the Air Force, he moved out. We were having some marital issues. I ended up having an affair.
Sure.
I think that's kind of what started it all.
Sure. And then even after your affair, did you and Brian maintain a relationship with one another?
Yes.
All right. Over the years, how would you describe the dynamics of your relationship with Brian?
We always, I believed as long as he didn't forcibly push me out of the marriage that we could work it out. And we tried counseling, we tried other things like that. And then after the drugs started, he said that once he got clean that we would figure out a way to make it work out. So,
Okay. And did you always love Brian?
always.
Did Brian always love you?
Yeah.
How would you describe him as a person relative to individuals that he had contact with or that was a part of his life?
He was very caring. He had issues, like everybody does, but he'd do anything for anybody. I remember he saw somebody on Facebook one time. He didn't even know them, and they were talking about how they didn't have food and they didn't have money to pay their gas and electric bill or to see their kids, and he contacted them on Facebook, and we drove over there and we took them shopping and we got them groceries and we paid their gas and electric bill, and he gave them money, and he loved to do things for other people more than he did for his own family sometimes.
Sure, absolutely. All right. And so was he always very generous of heart when it came to people who were in need?
Yeah, I would say most of the time.
All right. Were you and Brian still on very good terms throughout 2023 and going into January of 2024?
Yes.
All right. Now for Seth and Caleb, how old were they in January of 2024?
They were 24 and 22.
Where were the boys living during this period of time?
Seth had moved out. He was living with his now fiance. I don't think they had their baby. They had just had a baby. And Caleb was living with me.
All right. And how would you describe your relationship with Caleb?
I'm his mom.
Okay, sure, absolutely. All right, now, if you could describe then what you noticed after Brian lost his job at Secondary Roads. And actually, before we go there, when did Brian lose his job at Secondary Roads?
I believe it was about 6 or 7 months before he passed away. When he lost his job, I think he was pretty devastated about that. I was a little upset because I think that he was calling in a lot or not showing up on time, and he was a union worker. So I told him if he told them he had problems with drugs, that they would have to offer him. They'd have to offer him things like that, but he didn't want to admit to having the issues that he had.
Okay, do you know what triggered his involvement with drugs?
I think it was partly losing his job was probably a huge thing, and hanging out with people that were doing drugs.
Sure. And did Brian go through some type of surgery during this period of time too, where he was experiencing a lot of pain?
He did. He had a prostate surgery.
All right. Now, did you know what kind of drugs Brian was involved with?
Not in the very beginning, but I found out he was on heroin after we spent a night watching movies, and at night I thought he had sleep apnea. I was kind of laughing at him because he made fun of me for snoring and having sleep apnea. And then I noticed he stopped breathing, and then I ended up doing CPR, calling 911, doing chest compressions, and then they kept asking me what he took, and I said, nothing, we've been watching movies all night, and then they ended up Narcaning him, and when he came to, he admitted that he was doing heroin. That was in 2000.
In 2000?
Yeah.
All right.
And then after that, I know he started doing meth a few years later.
Okay.
For sure. I'm not sure.
Now, was it in 2000 or much closer in time to his death in 2024? And I just want to make sure.
It was closer to 2000 when I knew he was doing heroin.
Oh, gotcha.
But the meth was closer to 2024.
All right. Did you become acquainted with a woman by the name of Victoria Smeaton?
Yes.
Explain.
I found out about Victoria after I had gone over to his house and he wouldn't answer the door or the phone. And when he finally, I wouldn't leave. I kept knocking at the door because I didn't know why he wouldn't answer the door. And he told me he was going to call the police on me. And then I found out the next day that he had a girlfriend.
Okay, and who was that girlfriend?
Victoria.
When did you become aware of Victoria Smeaton being a part of Brian's life?
I believe it was the end of, I can't remember if it was the end of 2020 or the end of 2021, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Where was Brian living during that period of time after the two of you had separated?
At that time, he was living in the upper apartment on the house on Division.
Is that the 5210 North Division Street address?
Correct.
All right. Explain to us about that house. Who owned the house?
Jason Weaver.
All right. Had it been converted at some point in time from a single-family dwelling to an upstairs-downstairs duplex?
Correct.
Okay. What was the circumstance that resulted in Mr. Weaver converting it to an upstairs-downstairs duplex?
I'm not sure if it was an upstairs-downstairs when he originally purchased it, but originally he lived in the downstairs apartment with his fiance, and Brian and a roommate lived in the upstairs. And then when Jason married his fiance, they bought a house in Eldridge, and Brian moved to the downstairs, and his roommate had stayed in the upstairs with
Okay.
his girlfriend,
All right. And who was the roommate that had stayed up in the upper portion?
Brandon.
Brandon, all right. So Brandon is not somebody that's going to be a part of any of the testimony that we'll hear about, is that right? At some point, did Brandon and his girlfriend move out of the upstairs portion of the
Yes.
residence?
Yes.
Did it remain vacant then after Brandon and his girlfriend had vacated the upstairs portion?
I believe somebody had moved in very shortly before the fire, but I'm not sure if they were actually residing in the apartment at the time of the fire.
All right. All right. And then, do you know how long Brian had been living in the lower level of 5210 North Division prior to the events of January 2024?
It was over 2 years.
Over 2 years. All right. Did Brian live alone at 5210 North Division Street in that lower level?
No.
Okay. Describe who actually would stay there with Brian at that location.
He had people there in and out all the time. I know Anna was there sometimes. Tori had a house that she stayed there on and off. And then Adriana stayed in one of the bedrooms.
Okay.
Or the other bedroom.
When did you first become familiar with Adriana Blake?
I only met her once. It was the summer prior to everything. And I had gone to drop off mail to Brian, and she had happened to walk outside at the time that I got there. And she just said, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, "I'm Sarah, I'm his wife. Who the hell are you?"
Right.
She said, "I'm Adriana." "Oh, nice to meet you." And I was like, "Oh, it's nice to meet you." She seemed pleasant.
Okay. And did you have discussions with Brian about how Adriana Blake came to be present at his residence?
He had she had gone through some hard times. She had lost her wife, and he was helping her out.
Okay. And then by virtue of that, did Adriana Blake start to live there in the lower level of Brian's residence?
Yes.
How many bedrooms were there in the lower level?
I know there was at least 2.
All right. Now, if you were to go in that door on the south side of the property, down the stairs, immediately to your left, what room would that be?
Adriana's.
All right. And then if you're standing there looking straight ahead, is there a hallway?
Yes.
Where would Brian's bedroom be located then?
At the end of the hallway to the left was his room. If you went straight, there was the bathroom.
Got it. All right. How would you describe, what was your understanding of the relationship between Brian and his job at Secondary Roads? Describe what you noticed about his finances and the concerns that he had.
Well, I got very upset. He cashed in his 401k, which I thought was extremely irresponsible. He cashed in his IFRS account. He had no debt and perfect credit a year earlier, so he was taking out all these credit cards, and he was doing cash advances on those, which I found out after he passed because I had a credit report pulled on him. And then I had loaned him over $25,000 altogether within a 6-month period. So within 8 months, including the cash advances, not including any drug money, because I know he was selling drugs, and not including any gambling, because I know he was gambling a lot. It was over $300,000.
That he had access to?
Yeah.
And prior to January of 2024, what would have been the time frame that he had access to over $300,000?
It was within 7 to 8 months.
7 to 8 months. Was Brian secretive about having access to that kind of money as far as the people around him?
No.
Explain.
I think he bragged about having more money than he actually had. But he would get mad at me when I would say, well, that's not actually money that you have, that's money that I loaned you, or that's money that you took out on credit cards, and he would get very upset about me talking about that.
Sure. Did you express any concerns to Brian that you had that he would openly share with people around him that he had these sums of money?
I did.
Tell us about that.
I just told him I didn't think it was very responsible, and he stopped putting his money in the bank. I assume because he didn't have a job, so he was worried about, the bank taking it. I don't know. But he said that he hid a lot of it. He would hide it in the woods, and he would hide it in the speakers, and he said he hid it all over.
Okay. Did you have concerns about the fact that he wasn't keeping those monies in an account at the bank?
Yes.
What were your concerns?
My biggest concern was if anything happened to him, I had no access to any of it.
Sure. All right. Now, I'd like to talk about his cell phone or cell phones. Did Brian have more than one phone that he utilized?
He did.
Okay. Can you recall the numbers for either of those phones?
His main line was 563-579-6818.
Okay. Was this a number that you provided to law enforcement?
Yes.
And then do you recall what the number was for his second phone?
I don't, but it was also on my account.
All right. Was this a number that you provided to law enforcement so that they knew what telephone numbers were associated to Brian?
Yes.
All right. Other than using the phone for like normal purposes of making calls and things of that nature, did Brian use his phone in other ways relative to being able to access money?
I know that he used, I know that he gambled online a lot, and I know that he used PayPal, Cash App, multiple. I'm not familiar with all the different Cash App accounts, but I know that he used a lot of those. Yeah.
Okay. If somebody had access to his cell phone, then would they be able to utilize the phone to gain access to cash through those various types of applications?
If his password was saved in there, yes.
All right. At some point in time, did you start to develop any concerns about Adriana Blake?
I did not.
Okay. Were you even around 5210 North Division Street to know what types of dynamics were developing there at the residence?
I went to Casey's, to the gas station, because I only live about a mile from there, so I'd see people coming in and out, but there was no red flags that I saw
Sure.
that I was worried about.
All right. Now, let's talk about the late fall of 2023, either the end of October or November. Did you become aware of Brian going out of state?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with Richard Dean?
Yes.
Who is Richard Dean?
He was one of Brian's friends, and they were doing side jobs together.
Okay. What type of work does Richard Dean do for a living?
I was told that he does construction work.
Okay. And was Brian very adept at construction work?
Yeah, he was a union carpenter before he became a diesel mechanic.
Sure. When Brian left the state, who did he leave the state with?
The only people I know for sure were Richard Dean.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you know what state they went to?
Arizona, I believe.
And for what purpose?
I believe to do a job there. I'm not sure what the job was, but I know I sent him money online, so.
And was that while Brian was down there in Arizona
Yeah,
working?
he said he needed more materials. He didn't have enough materials to finish the job, so I sent him money.
Okay. Did you know a woman by the name of Amy Smith?
Only because I saw her walk from his house to the gas station one time, and I thought she was looking at me, and so I messaged him and said, "Why is this woman walking out of your house looking at me?" And he said, she's not. And she doesn't live at my house. I was
Okay.
like, okay. And then Tori told me her name was Amy. And that's the only time I ever heard of her.
All right. Now, when you say Tori, is that a
Victoria,
nickname?
sorry.
Victoria Smeaton?
Smeaton, yes.
All right. Did you even know that Amy Smith had been staying at the 5210 North Division Street with
I did
Brian
not.
prior to and at the time of his death?
No.
All right. Did Brian have a number of cars?
He did.
Describe.
Council, it's nearly 4:30. This might be a good place to stop for today.
Okay. Can we finish up with the cars? Because then we'll transition, and it won't
All right.
take us very long with the cars. Describe.
He had a Toyota Celica that Caleb was driving. He had a Nissan Xterra. He had a yellow Jeep Wrangler. He had, I can't remember what the other one was.
Was it the black and white Dodge Nitro?
Dodge Nitro, yes.
Okay. And during 2023 and in the fall of 2023, before Brian had gone down to Arizona, what was his primary vehicle?
I believe it was the Xterra.
All right. Did you know if he had loaned that vehicle out in the days preceding January 14th to anyone to drive?
I'm not positive, but he did loan out cars all the time.
Okay.
And I know he had asked to borrow my vehicle, so.
Okay, so then does that take us to a discussion that we'll have about the events of January 14th?
Yes.
Will this be a good stopping point?
Yes.
Okay, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to conclude for today.